Hey everybody, how's it going? I got another video with me sitting in front of my microphone, and I've done a few of these this past week because it's really easy to do, and it helps me get these videos up a little sooner, a little quicker. I don't know, I seem to spend a lot of time editing my audio, when with these the audio sounds good and I don't really spend much time editing it because I kind of feel like this is an informal way to share these stories. Y'all want to see something cool? Watch when I move my head over here. Is that camera following me? See if I can screw it up with my hands. Anyway, this webcam I've had it for a couple of months, hadn't used it very much, but it follows me wherever I go, which is probably, doesn't really matter either way, but I thought it was kind of cool. Thought I'd show it to you. All right, I got 4 stories in this podcast. 3 of these stories are from my buddy Todd out in Colorado, who has sent me multiple stories. He's a story collector, he's an observer, he's a listener, and all of the stories that he shares are really good. And here's the first one. The title of the story is Anna. What follows are several experiences recently shared with me by a coworker. As 14-year-old Anna snuck out of the house and made her way to her favorite place. It was a tree swing that sat atop a hill, and it was motionless and waiting. It overlooked the valley and stream below, which was a good quarter of a mile from her home, and this is where she came to escape from her 4 brothers and to enjoy the fresh air and to daydream in peace. As the wind blew through her hair, she saw something shimmering and sparkling. It was 60 to 80 feet away. Rubbing her eyes to make sure of what she was looking at, she could make out a silver triangle hovering 12 feet above the stream. She immediately slowed the swing enough so that she could jump off, and she ran down the hill to see what it was, but when she got there it was gone. Where did it go, she wondered, as it only took a few seconds to get there. Sharing this childhood story with me, she remembers that it didn't make any sounds and it had a light at each corner. She also estimated it to be around 10 to 15 feet long, and it was a silver metal material. She also doesn't remember seeing any people around it, and when she asked about being abducted and missing time, she said she doesn't remember a sense of missing time or any strange dreams or memories. She continued that when she was 15 years old and living in Stephenville, Texas, her and her brother were out for a drive around town one night. That's when they saw the sign for Rising Star, Texas, and they decided to make the drive. After driving for nearly an hour, she asked her brother, "Shouldn't we have been there by now?" Well, he agreed and offered to turn around and go back. "Let's just go back," she said. As soon as she turned the car around, they were immediately back in Stephenville. During one of her dreams, you know, the ones that seem super vivid and real, she saw her brother floating motionless up at the ceiling while she slept. She was standing in the middle of the bedroom and was in a conversation with a gray alien. When she looked back at her brother, 2 other grays went to get him down. They lowered him somehow so they could move him around, and one gray was at his feet, the other was holding his shoulders. Just then a door or hatch opened in the floor, and the 2 grays escorted her sleeping brother down into it. When she was 34 years old, she remembers having too much to drink one evening and admits that she drove home drunk. She recalls seeing a beautiful sunset in front of her, so she stopped to take a photo and then continued toward home. While she was making her way along the curvy country road, she noticed an object in the sky pacing along the side of her. It followed closely all the way home and at the same speed she was driving, and then once she got out of the car, she watched as it flew away. "I believe they were following me home to make sure I made it safely," she told me. Many days later, while looking at the photo on my phone, there was something else in it, and when you zoom in, it looks like a glowing saucer craft. That was the object that followed me home, she told me. I didn't see it when I took the photo on the way home. I'll put that photo right here. You can look at that photo as I finish the story. She also has many memories or dreams of her flying. And when asked if she remembers having or seeing a silver cord attached to her like people having out-of-body experiences report, she said there wasn't one. I asked if she was in a craft or flying like Superman. I was flying outside of the craft, she said. And that's the end of her story. And what's all these abduction type stories are fascinating to me, but what's really interesting is the picture that you saw. I'll put it up, maybe it's still up here on the screen, but she didn't see it when she took the picture, but when the digital components of her phone developed the picture, that object is there. That's really interesting to me. So thanks, Todd, for sending Anna's story. Here's another one from Todd. This one is called The Boy Scientist. We were in the process of moving into a new store location, and while taking down and dismantling the sign out front, a stranger approached me. He wanted to share a few stories with me, so I stopped what I was doing and I listened. Now, this is the boy telling the story right here. This story begins when I was around 4 or 5 years of age, he began. I remember my parents taking me to a location with small hills surrounding the area. We went there often. One day, while en route to the location, I could see up ahead a metallic disc-shaped craft sitting on the ground, and people appeared to be working on it. I remember thinking that it was being built by these people. Once we parked and got out, the workers asked me to come over and inspect the craft. I also recall walking around it and somehow knowing where to place my hand to open a door into the craft. And when the door opened, I was just about to go inside when someone stopped me to ask my advice on some other matter. That's really all I can remember, he told me. I don't even remember if I eventually got to go inside the craft. Over the years, as an adult, I've been plagued with those similar memories, and I even set out multiple times to find that place, but I never succeeded. I remember the tiny location with the hills well, but I cannot remember anything beyond the surrounding hills or how we got there, he added. He told me that he's also asked his parents repeatedly about it and where they lived when he was 4 or 5 years old, but they've continued to withhold that information. And he concluded, either way, they've been told to keep it a secret, or they really don't know what I'm talking about. It's really rather strange. His next story developed while he was on vacation. He was out near 2 popular hiking trails when he saw some strange lights in the sky. And from his experience, he told me he felt that they were not conventional aircraft, so he wanted to start up a conversation with some people who were parked nearby. Something was strange about them, he said, but I couldn't be sure what it was. And when I turned around to look at them again, they were gone, and so was their vehicle. He told me that he recalled going home and later that evening asking for a sign that those were in fact UFOs he'd seen over the canyons. My request was specific to the day, time, and location where I wanted to receive the confirmation, he clarified. When the time neared, I drove up to the lookout near the airport. There were other people up there, so I wasn't alone. 2 of the people standing near me seemed a little odd, too, so I turned to the man and asked what had drawn them to the lookout that day. The stranger replied that he had heard there was going to be a large sighting in the sky at sunset, and he pointed to an area of the sky in the distance. Because of the odd coincidence of what the stranger said and where he pointed, he decided to turn and walk away. He pointed to the same location that I saw the lights, he added, and that freaked me out. And as I walked away, I thought to myself, that's enough of a sign for me. And suddenly I heard the woman who was with him say, well, I guess there won't be a sighting after all. The following story was the final experience he shared with me. After possibly feeling separation anxiety, or to reassure himself that he wasn't crazy and that his memories of seeing craft and interacting with other beings was real, he again asked for contact and selected the time and the location. This time, he began, I arrived at my preferred location a bit early and parked the car, and I waited. And as the minutes passed, I grew restless. And then, right at the prescribed time, an old beat-up truck pulled up beside my car. It was driven by a woman. I couldn't believe it, he said. There were so many other places to park. Why did she have to park right next to me? I looked back at my watch, and it was now past the requested meeting time, and I became frustrated, and I huffed as I reached for the keys and started up my car. As I backed out and shifted into drive, I looked back at the mother and child one last time. It was at that moment the newborn sat up and waved goodbye to me. It wasn't until miles down the road and about halfway home that I realized what had just happened. I replayed in my mind all the details from that brief period in the park, leaving me no choice but to conclude that they were there to meet me, and I blew it. He continued, They were setting up a sort of picnic, but it wasn't warm out, and what mother would bring a newborn child out into the cold elements for a picnic? And the child was not dressed warmly either. And what newborn baby can sit up on its own and lift its arm and then wave goodbye while looking right at me? He asked me this while shaking his head. That's a good story. That is a good story. These people have recurring events over and over and over. And I see in the comments and I see in emails that people send me, and this is so interesting to me, that once you have one of these experiences, they continue to happen through your life, and sometimes you have to really think about what's going on. And then for the rest of your life, if you tell other people, you're branded as a nut. And I'm glad that this man shared this story with Todd. No names are given. Nobody here can call him a nut, but it is fascinating stuff. Let's do a Bigfoot story right now, and then I'll do the last one from Todd. This is a Bigfoot story from Barry in Idaho. Back in the late 1980s, when I was 10, we lived in the Waha Mountains of northern Idaho, where I spent most of my time outdoors hunting and fishing. I would often run off in the woods by myself, where sometimes I'd notice things would get real quiet, and I'd get the feeling that something was watching me. One day, while we were out driving, my mother suddenly yelled at my dad to stop the car. Dad argued, but Mom won, so we stopped and we got out. Behind us on the road were bear tracks. Some were big and some were small. We followed them to a meadow that rested on top of a small hill. I was fascinated by what I was seeing, so I continued to follow the largest tracks into a stand of trees. And Mom and Dad were close behind. And there we found one impression. It was the footprint of some giant creature, and it appeared to have mowed down several trees. In the middle of those trees we found a spot where it looked like the creature had fallen, and we could see the evidence in the snow where it had pushed itself up. I'm guessing by the size that it must have been the alpha. My father and I both measured our arms against the marks left by the creature's arms, and my dad was a big man, but even his long arms couldn't match the imprints. We tried stomping in the frozen snow to make prints deep as the creature's, but we couldn't. Its print went all the way into the mud, and ours went no more than an inch deep. Well, I couldn't believe it. It was the coolest thing I'd ever seen, and it was all right in front of me. I saw all the little imperfections in the foot. There were veins and wrinkles and signs of past injuries and impressions of hair around the foot. It looked like it had broken a little toe that curved outward. There was a small track that showed up for just a few feet, as if it was an infant that had been allowed to walk for a few minutes and was then lifted back up into the mother's arms. I followed the largest track over to what was clearly a vantage point overlooking the meadow, and I imagined it had stopped there for quite a while before turning and heading into the trees. My father went into town and got something to make a cast, and he contacted Grover Krantz, the famous professor at the University of Washington, who told him he believed that Bigfoot was an ancestor of Gigantopithecus. He told my father to kill one and bring in the lower jaw, and then we can prove that Bigfoot exists, Dr. Krantz said. I was listening in on the call, and I clearly remember my father uttering a few unkind words in response. Sometime later, my mother and I were out driving the back roads up in the mountains again when we came across another set of tracks. We decided it must have been a juvenile that made them. I think we thought that we were some kind of pros out in the forest, but we were about to find out that we were intermediate at best. We were about to get schooled. We started following the track, careful to walk next to them, not in them. It wasn't long before I started to realize that we were making a big circle. It was doubling back. As soon as I saw our car ahead of us, I got the feeling that we were being watched, and the hair on the back of my neck stood up, and I felt fear unlike I'd ever felt it before. I instinctively started trying to be quieter, and I was fighting to remain calm, and I felt like it was in the trees above us. "I'm right here," I whispered. "I know," Mom answered quietly. "I think it's above us," I told her. "Then don't look up," she replied. "We need to get out of here," I said, fighting to hide the fear in my voice. We made it out, but I couldn't stop thinking about how it had doubled back on us, and somewhere along the way it had turned and walked right back into its own tracks. I realized that we were out there tracking something that could have hurt us, and we were unarmed. I wanted to share these two encounters for a while now. It isn't easy. I grew up in a time when people told stories like these, and they were considered weirdos. I'm glad things have changed. Barry, I don't know if things have changed or not, but it is a great story. And the doubling back, man, that is an event I have never heard of. So you're out tracking a Bigfoot, and he's just walking in circles. He's staying on the opposite side of the circle, putting his feet right back in the tracks, and he's running you in circles. That sounds like something Native Americans would do at some point. Maybe. I don't have any proof of that, but it sounds like something they would do because they were very crafty and clever out in the wilderness. So, Barry, thanks for the story. It was really good. All right, let me open Todd's last story, and then we will end this podcast. All right, this is a story Todd entitles, "My Name is Todd." I don't know if he's talking about himself or not. I'm reading this cold. I haven't read this, so first time I've read it. From the first night they lived in the house, bumps or thuds, the sound of feet running in the attic, beings walking past windows, and the sounds of doors shuttings all began at 11 p.m. every night. After a long tour, I'd oftentimes get back to their house well after midnight, even as late as 3 a.m. I would drop off their truck and then drive my car home, which was a good 35 minutes away. I was already tired, and it was common for me to spend the night on their couch rather than driving all the way home. My boss's daughter always had friends staying over, even on the weekend nights. They were always up all night playing and talking in their bedroom. One night, while sleeping on the couch, I awoke to find 3 of them curled up together on the floor next to the couch. They hadn't slept yet, and the sun was on the rise. I asked, "What's going on? How come you're not in your bedroom?" One of them said, "Well, we can't sleep in there." "What do you mean you can't sleep in there?" I said. "We hear noises and see things outside the window," said the daughter. "What sort of noises?" I asked. "Well, it's like people running on the roof," she replied. "It always happens at 11 p.m. "Okay," I said, as I rolled back over and went back to sleep. Over the next several weeks, this same thing played out again and again, and finally her mother changed bedrooms with her, but that didn't help. Then their daughter's birthday arrived, and they took her to Las Vegas, and they asked me to house sit and keep an eye on the dog. It was business as usual at the shop, and I'd crash at their place afterward. The dog and I got along great. When it was time for bed, she slept close by. The first night, I heard them become active. The house was previously quiet, and then sounded as if a family returned home from vacation or something. Doors were slamming, and kids were running around, etc. And when I turned to see what time it was, the clock said 11 p.m. Just like clockwork, I thought to myself. She was right. There's a lot of noise, and it sounded like a bunch of people on the roof or in the attic. While I lay there awake, I listened to them and mentally followed their activities around the house, and I made notes of where I heard them. The following night, I went to bed before 11 o'clock so I could send them a bit of an invite. And as I lay under the blanket, I sent them a thought that if they were okay with it, I would like to see them. My name is Todd, and I'm watching the house and the dog, I said to them in my thoughts. If you would rather not show yourselves to me now, maybe you could appear to me during my dreams, I added. Sometime in the early hours, I heard someone near me whisper, "His name is Todd." With this, I awoke to see two women in period dresses, maybe from the 1800s, standing about 4 feet from me. One of them was facing me, while the other, who I believe was the one talking, was slightly turned to the side with her back to me as if looking at the other woman while she talked. The more I tried to focus on them, the more I awoke and the less I saw them. Within 5 seconds, I couldn't see them at all. After this encounter, I never again heard them in the attic, and that was the only time I ever saw them. So he was talking about himself. This is a real experience Todd had, and he's had multiple experiences. And I'm going to shut up about his book. I want to read his book, and I've talked to you all about that before. But those are 3 stories from Todd out in Colorado, and then 1 Bigfoot story. And I hope you enjoyed the podcast. I'm not going to do this film thing just a ton, but it's a fast way to get some stories done, and I could explain how I do it, but it's kind of boring. But with that, I'll tell you how much I appreciate you watching this podcast, and we'll see you guys on the next one, hopefully soon. Thanks, and we'll see you next time.